The more you know, the more you'll grow. At TVO, we know that informed minds lead to great transformations, but we need your support more than ever before. Right now, you can double your impact. Donations made by December 3rd will be matched up to a total of $150,000. Your support helps provide in-depth journalism, documentaries, learning resources, and kids programming that help you discover the you didn't know you could become. Exciting, isn't it? Visit tvo.org/Giving Tuesday to make your donation today and discover your 2-point TVO.
You are listening.
You're listening.
You are listening.
You're listening
To a TVO Today.
to a TVO Today
TVO Today. TVO Today
podcast.
The following episode is about alleged homophobia and transphobia. It also mentions suicide. Please listen with care.
Good evening. I'm calling the meeting to order for November 7, 2019. Let's all stand for the opening prayer, please. In the name of the Father,
This
Son,
is how all Toronto Catholic District School Board meetings begin, with an opening prayer.
by the power of God, thrust into hell Satan and all the evil spirits. Amen. In the name of the Father, Son, Holy Spirit.
And that prayer opened a meeting that would go on for another 5 hours.
I max out at 3.
I'm the same way.
Before we
To be fair, though, they've got a lot to talk about. By they, I mean the school trustees, 12 elected officials whose decisions affect more than 86,000 students across 196 schools. The trustees all have their own ideas when it comes to running a school board, but at this meeting in November 2019, their ideas clash in a big way.
So I'd like to move an amendment to add to the protected classes the following.
That's Trustee Michael Del Grande. He's been a trustee with the Toronto Catholic District School Board for nearly 20 years, off and on. He's a devout Catholic and serves in various leadership roles at his Toronto parish.
At this meeting on November 7th, 2019, the trustees are grappling with how to add 4 terms, new classes of people that must be protected from discrimination, to the school code of conduct. The proposed new terms are gender identity, gender expression, marital status, and family status.
And that would mean Toronto Catholic schools wouldn't be able to discriminate against people for the gender they identify with, how they present their gender, whether they're divorced or in a same-sex marriage, and whether they're in a relationship with people who are queer or trans.
Exactly. Earlier that year, all boards in Ontario had received a directive from the Ministry of Education to align themselves with the Ontario Human Rights Code. At this meeting, Toronto Catholic was already past the deadline. Tensions were high.
It's late into the night when the whole thing gets put to a vote. That's when the trustee you just heard, Mike Del Grande, gets up.
It's a slippery slope. This is how slippery it's going to get.
He's about to throw a can of fuel on an already growing fire.
So move an amendment to add to protected classes the following. Part 1, bestiality, sexual relations between a human and an animal. Zoophilia, paraphilia.
As Del Grande is making these remarks, text messages are firing off. People are whispering. Someone's like, what? Someone's like, shh, don't talk. The room is realizing that Mike Del Grande is proposing to include criminals and fetishists as people that should be protected from discrimination. The list keeps getting more alarming.
Pedophilia or pedophilia is a psychiatric disorder.
And Mike Del Grande's proposed list of additional protected classes goes on for almost 5 minutes.
Anthropophagia is raping and then cannibalizing another person. Anthropophagy, ingesting human flesh.
One trustee is concerned and pulls something procedural to interrupt Mike Del Grande.
Image of oneself in the form of vampire.
Point of order.
Jesus loves all these people. All these poor people are children of God, created in the image of God, and they need to be recognized.
Later to the press, Mike Del Grande would say his remarks, the proposed list of philias, were meant to be facetious to prove a point, that he was using a debate technique called rhetorical hyperbole. that those words were his response to what he saw as an attack on his Catholic values.
We reached out to Michael Del Grande, his lawyer, Charles Lugosi, and the Toronto Catholic District School Board communications team for comment. Only Charles Lugosi agreed to speak with us. Throughout the show, you'll hear Charles Lugosi speak on Mike Del Grande's behalf.
Mr. Del Grande is more than willing to speak. The thing is, Mr. Del Grande, his health has seriously deteriorated with all the stress. He authorized me to speak on his behalf, if need be, on any matter. And that's why I feel I'm at liberty to talk to you.
Del Grande firmly disputes the allegations that he was comparing any of the philias raised in his remarks to gender identity, gender expression, marital status, and or family status.
The controversial terms Michael Del Grande named were never added to the Toronto Catholic Code of Conduct.
But his remarks tipped the issue of queer and trans rights over the edge at Toronto Catholic.
And speak to a larger conflict happening in the world today.
Like everybody's rights are human rights.
The pride flag is a lie.
This is following the teachings of Jesus Christ.
Free and equal.
A conflict that is being fought in our classrooms, boardrooms, courts, online, and in the streets.
The children of anti-trans demonstrators trampled on pride flags in front of a school.
The right to practice religion and the right to live free from discrimination appear to be going head to head.
It's not to dismiss gender dysphoria. For us, it just comes down to your biological sex is undeniable.
Are queer and trans inclusive Catholic schools even possible?
When that priest gave me a vision of being Catholic that was progressive, that was a lot more open, that changed my life.
Can denominational rights and 2SLGBTQ+ rights be balanced in Catholic spaces?
The culture of death.
The main problem is that we've shut parents out of the conversation, and that's not the right solution.
He said, if it gets out and a trustee finds proof that you're married, he said, they will come after you.
I'm Matt Nethersole.
And I'm Tiff.
This is episode 1, God Made Them All.
School trustees are like the forgotten fourth level of politics. A good chunk of people probably only encounter them when they tick a box next to a name they've barely heard of while voting in a municipal election.
But school trustees have a lot of power, particularly the Toronto Catholic District School Board trustees. They govern one of the largest public Catholic school boards in Canada.
And as powerful as they are, school trustees are still accountable to the public. One of the ways the public can challenge the board's decisions is by speaking at board meetings. Procedurally, it's called delegating.
And that brings us to former student trustee Kyle Iannuzzi. Kyle was at the Toronto Catholic Board meeting on November 7th, 2019, when Trustee Del Grande made his controversial remarks.
I literally jumped out of my seat.
In this show, we'll use both he and they when referring to Kyle.
Let's just break down exactly what Kyle was doing there that day.
Please.
They were there to speak in favor of including gender identity, gender expression, marital status, and family status into the Toronto Catholic District School Board Code of Conduct.
That couldn't have been easy, especially on a topic like queer and trans inclusion at a Catholic board.
Right, and there Kyle was, confident in where they stood on the debate and angry at the amendment that Trustee Del Grande had tried to make.
I remember saying to the director, get a handle of your board.
The Director of Education is the person who leads the school employees and helps to advise the elected trustee members. So, essentially, one of the most senior guys in the room.
And the courage to confront him came from Kyle knowing that gender identity and gender expression needed to be included in the board's code of conduct. It wasn't just words on paper for Kyle. It was a matter of life and death. And he made that point in his presentation.
I knew that a policy reflecting the realities of LGBTQ students was precisely what would have helped me with the bullying I faced and may have helped another student I knew who committed suicide because they couldn't face their family, their school, and their faith. Suicide was also something I too grappled with because I didn't see myself in my home, my friends, my church, and my school.
A trustee asks Kyle whether adding those protected classes to the school code of conduct would help to end stigma.
Stigma would definitely be a big help, but it also does more than that. It empowers your staff with the tools to be able to actually confront the issues and to use the proper language to do so.
So how did you feel, walking home that night or however you got home? What was going through your mind?
I just remember being enraged. I think we immediately got to work on creating a complaint.
Kyle's wasn't the only complaint that the board received about Trustee Del Grande. One student wrote, "You make me feel utterly disgraced to call myself a Catholic school graduate."
Another said, Trustee Del Grande's comments equating gender identity and expression with pedophilia or bestiality are ludicrous, offensive, and downright disgusting.
Petitions calling for Trustee Del Grande's resignation received thousands of signatures. The Minister of Education, the Mayor of Toronto, and the leader of the Ontario NDP at the time all condemned Michael Del Grande's comments. Former Toronto Mayor John Tory called the comments dinosaur-like.
The board would eventually hire a law firm to investigate whether Trustee Del Grande breached the board's code of conduct.
The report concluded that Trustee Del Grande had failed to uphold his duties as an elected school trustee. Kyle had hoped that these findings would lead to the accountability they were looking for, but that wasn't the case.
And they exonerated Trustee Del Grande. So we found that out, and we said something's wrong here.
And so Kyle took their complaint all the way to the Ontario Ministry of Education.
I actually had a phone call with Deputy Minister of Education and was told that they would monitor the situation.
But Kyle says they weren't satisfied with the ministry's response, so they took a different approach.
I had called a friend of mine who is a communications expert, and I said, I need your help. This story is just not getting the traction it deserves, and this is too big. What do I do? And he said, I want to introduce you to Kathleen Wynne.
So can I refer to you as Kathleen?
Yes,
Kathleen
of
in the
course.
show.
Yeah, of course.
And can I talk about your identity as a lesbian
Absolutely.
woman on the
Absolutely.
show? Yeah.
My name is Kathleen Wynne. I am the former Premier of Ontario and a former Minister of Education. And I am currently a grandma.
These days, other than being a proud grandma, Kathleen teaches at the University of Toronto.
We're sure we can call her Kathleen, right?
I think that's what she said.
And I do things like this because I think my responsibility is to talk about my experience and the issues that I've dealt with in my political career.
So just to be clear about the timeline, when Mike Del Grande made his controversial remarks, and then later when Kathleen Wynne would delegate about this, she was not the Minister of Education, but she was a member of provincial parliament.
And after hearing what Mike Del Grande had said at a Toronto Catholic board meeting, Kathleen Wynne was moved to action. She chose to delegate. Again, that means speaking or submitting a written statement at a board meeting.
You know, it's unusual for a former premier to delegate to a school board, but I was so closely connected to education and I was so invested in good outcomes for kids in the province when I was in my political career that it didn't feel like a stretch to me for me to lend my voice to that cause.
And so on November 11th, 2020, just over a year after Michael Del Grande's initial comments, Kathleen Wynne video conferenced into a Toronto Catholic board meeting and had some harsh words for the board.
Here's what I thought we all understood. That we live in a province where people cannot be disadvantaged or discriminated against because they are gay or lesbian or trans or two-spirited. None of our schools is exempt from compliance with the Ontario Human Rights Code, and neither are our school boards. But my concern is that you chose to protect one of your colleagues who ignored that consensus.
For the former premier, ignoring that consensus wasn't just about Trustee Del Grande. In her view, Trustee Del Grande was part of a growing issue, an issue of school boards not fully respecting ministry anti-discrimination directives.
I remember when I was Minister of Education and then as Premier, but particularly when I was Minister of Education, having all the directors of the Catholic school boards and the public school boards in one room and really being very clear with them that it was my expectation as the minister that the publicly funded schools, nearly 5,000 of them in the province, all of them would follow the ministry guidelines, because that was the law. It was the Education Act, that they would comply with the law of the land and the ministry directives. That over time got better and there was more compliance. But what I have seen and what I think Del Grande's behavior was demonstrating is that that was starting to unravel.
Toronto Catholic told TVO Today that since Trustee Del Grande's remarks, the board has implemented an equity action plan. In an emailed statement, Toronto Catholic's comms department said, in part, the plan's goal is to create an inclusive learning environment where all students can thrive. This includes developing anti-oppression professional learning for staff, with a key focus on human rights obligations to support 2SLGBTQ+ students.
Before we go further, let's rewind for a moment. Because to understand what happens next, it's important to know how publicly funded Catholic schools came to be in the first place. To answer that question, we spoke to an expert at the University of Toronto.
My name is Mark McGowan. I'm a professor of history and Celtic studies.
Professor McGowan told us that back in the 1800s, Canada was a very Christian society. Most people were Protestant, and Catholics were the religious minority.
Only about 15% of the population on this side of the Ottawa River was declared as Roman Catholic, and they felt threatened, and sometimes rightfully so.
Amid this sectarian tension, some Catholics were worried that their kids would be targeted at public schools for their religion.
And so legislation empowered Catholics to build their own schools and establish a separate Catholic school system.
This legislation also mandated that separate schools would be funded with public money.
Then, leading up to 1867, colonial politicians began discussing the idea of unifying the colonies that existed at the time. The idea was called Confederation. And one of the terms of Confederation was to give provinces the power to administer education.
How are you going to be able to keep your schools if now the province is, let's say, in Ontario, Protestant, and doesn't want Catholic schools?
Okay, I know we're getting a little grade 10 history class here, but stay with us.
That's where Section 93 of the British North America Act came in, which essentially guaranteed that the federal government would intervene and preserve those schools as they existed in 1867.
This promise in Section 93 to preserve the Catholic school system got Catholics on side with the National Project of Confederation.
So now we have legally established, publicly funded, and constitutionally protected. Those three things are absolutely essential to understanding the way that system is even today. Those three principles are at the bedrock of it.
Here's Kathleen Wynne again.
I have, through my time as Minister of Education and Premier, I have been supportive of the education system as it exists. But I have also said to leadership in the Catholic Church that if it is impossible for them to adhere to and comply with the law, meaning the Education Act, and ministry protocols and policy, it will become very difficult for politicians to support the existence of the Catholic education system.
The way the former Premier and Education Minister sees it, the ball is in the court of the Catholic schools to make sure they are complying with the law, including the laws protecting the rights of queer and trans people.
It is their job to make sure that they deliver education that's consistent with Catholic teachings to the degree that they can comply with ministry guidelines and the law. That's the line they have to walk. I don't think it's a difficult line because, quite honestly, the tenets of Catholicism, which are tenets of Christianity, should be consistent with creating a safe place for all human beings in a school. They should be. I leave it to them to figure that out.
After Kathleen Wynne made that statement to the Toronto Catholic Board of Trustees, the board changed its position and voted that Mike Del Grande had breached the code of conduct after all.
It's also worth noting that the board did vote to add the 4 terms to the code of conduct, so gender expression, gender identity, marital status, and family status, terms that would protect queer and trans people at Toronto Catholic. But there was a catch.
The board stipulated that the code of conduct is to be, quote, interpreted through the lens of the Catholic faith as articulated by the teachings of the Church. Here's Kyle, the former student trustee again.
I don't think you can interpret queer inclusion, especially for trans folks, through a Catholic lens.
Why is that?
I mean, the teaching of the Catholic Church remains that to be transgender is to be intrinsically disordered. So I don't know how you can protect in a code of conduct someone's own sanctity and individuality and identity when you at the same time call it intrinsically disordered.
The Catholic Church has used the term intrinsically disordered to describe queer and trans people in the past. But, August 2024, the Church released a new document, a declaration of Catholic values called The Infinite Dignity of the Human Person, and it covers, in part, the Catholic view of gender and sexuality. We didn't find the term intrinsically disordered in this document, and I think it's fair to say that Pope Francis is seen as a more progressive pope.
But the Infinite Dignity document does say, any sex change intervention as a rule risks threatening the unique dignity of the person. So, not exactly an affirmation of trans identities either. And you also have to factor in that in 2024, the Pope did use an Italian slur to describe gay men in a closed-door meeting with bishops. He did apologize.
All this to say, the head of the Catholic Church has, at the very least, an unclear position on gender and sexuality. And maybe that leads people to believe that they can make homophobic and transphobic remarks, arguably like the ones Trustee Del Grande made.
In the end, the board did vote that Mike Del Grande had breached their code of conduct. They voted to censure him. And the terms of Trustee Del Grande's censure included completing an equity training program, presenting a public apology, and barring him from sitting on committees for 3 months.
But to this day, Trustee Del Grande hasn't done any of that. Instead, he took his own board to court.
Trustee Del Grande has since argued that accepting the board's sanctions would be unreasonable. Del Grande still says that it was unfair and illegal for the board to reconsider its motion to sanction him. He says he was upholding his duty to champion Catholic values as a Catholic school trustee. The Confederation of Canada itself empowers him to do that through Section 93. That was the deal.
His inability to let go and to continue to be litigious on this is a demonstration of how wrong-headed he actually is on this issue, you know. He should let it go. That's my opinion.
Online, Trustee Del Grande has said that his legal battle is a precedent-setting case, that freedom of speech and freedom of religion hang in the balance. He's also said that in this case, he's the victim.
Well, it's just so much you can take with people believing that they are Jesus on the cross. I have no time for it.
One organization calls Trustee Del Grande a defender of the Catholic faith and has crowdfunded hundreds of thousands of dollars for his legal case.
We appreciate when trustees are willing to take a stand knowing that it's going to be difficult and they're going to be persecuted for doing that.
Who is the far-right Christian organization supporting Trustee Del Grande, and what do they believe?
That's next time on Queries in Good Faith. Queries in Good Faith is hosted and written by me, Tiff Lamb.
And me, Matt Nethersole.
Sound design and editing by me, Tiff Lamb.
Our associate producer is Leticia Dogbay.
Editing and technical support from Matthew O'Mara.
Special thanks to Marina Black.
And Control F.
For TVO, Katie O'Connor is the managing editor of podcasts and digital video.
Lori Few is the executive producer of digital.
John Ferry is vice president, programming and content.
Theme music by Allison Leighton Brown.
Audio clips courtesy of Global News, CBC, and the Toronto Catholic District School Board.
Thanks for listening.